Hello Algebra 2. In this video lesson we continue the discussion from chapter 4.5, which we've been talking about in a previous video lesson, saying that you can use a graphing calculator to solve a system of equations. This time in this lesson we're going to talk about how this process actually works. And I'm only going to get into the basics. In class when we meet I'll talk about this in more detail. But in terms of the basics, I'm going to try to cover this fairly briefly here for you. First of all, remember that in the last video I gave you this 4x4 system of equations, and we turned that into this by pulling out first the coefficients from the left side and making a matrix of those, and then pulling out the constants from the right side, making a matrix of those, and multiplying the inverse of this coefficient matrix times the constant matrix, and together that multiplied result gave us what W and X and Y and Z are. We already did that in the last video. But actually, let's back up a little and remind ourselves how we got there. Originally, we weren't talking about an inverse, and we had these in the swapped order. And so what we actually had was what I called the matrix equation, which really looks a whole lot more actually than like what we have above, with these constants on the right. Here they are again on the right. The coefficients like they had been on the left, but together this time with the variables. So let's pull that aside here and remind ourselves how the calculator talked about these matrices. They called this one here on the left simply the A matrix in the calculator itself. And the calculator called this one that we have now on the right the B matrix. So I've got to give a similar name to this one for the variables, and not so because it's all variables, I'll call it the V matrix. So what we're saying literally here is matrix A times matrix V equals matrix B. Now, if though what I want to do is figure out what V is, well, let's get the rest of it out of the way so it's not cluttering our view here. If I wanted to know what V was, I would want to get A out of the way. So what I would do is divide B over A, and that should give me V. The only problem is that you can't divide with a matrix. Interestingly though, you are allowed to multiply times the reciprocal of a matrix. This reciprocal here, 1 over A, that's what A to the minus 1 is. That's what the inverse matrix is. It's simply the reciprocal of A. And so you're allowed to do the reciprocal of A, or in other words, the inverse of A times B. So that's what we were actually doing. We were taking the reciprocal, or the inverse, of this coefficient matrix and multiplying it times the constant matrix, and that's what was giving us W and X and Y and Z. That's, in a nutshell, that's in terms of the basics, that's how the process works. So let's look at an example and apply this. Here's a story that should look familiar to you because we've talked about this movie rental store problem before. Hit the pause button, and when we come back I'm going to talk this through, but I want to give you a chance to read the paragraph. Okay, I'm going to assume that you did that. So notice in the paragraph it gives us totals as well. Totals for the number of general videos and children's videos and videos for sale. So I'll put those over here. Now if I want to turn this into a matrix equation, well, first step, getting rid of all the words so that I don't clutter things here for us. I've got comedy, drama, and action, and I've got 3 values for each. And then I've got results on the right. Well, this looks a lot like what we had before. I've got those same sets of values here, those same coefficients on the left, times my variables equals my constants. I'm going to simplify these variables and call them C, D, and A. And now, to try to find out what C, D, and A are, just like I was doing before, I would say that C, D, and A are equal to the inverse of the coefficient matrix times those constants. Okay, I've set this up for you now. Hit the pause button, put all this information into your calculator, and when you'll come back I'll tell you how many comedies, how many dramas, and how many action movies there ought to have been. Okay, I'm going to assume that you did that. And here are your answers. 2,000 on the comedies, 1,700 on the dramas, and 2,000 on the act. Okay, and now that I've set one up for you like that and you went ahead and found the answer, let's have you do one from scratch. This is a very similar word problem. Hit the pause button, and when you come back, I'll tell you, as they've asked here, how much of the three types of alloy you can make. How much of alloy X, how much Y, and how much Z you'll have. Go ahead and hit the pause button, and I'll give you the answer in just whenever you're ready. Okay, I'm going to assume that you put all that information into your graphing calculator and you've come up with an answer for X and Y and Z, and this is what you should have come up with. You ought to come up with 100 for X, 200 for Y, and 300 for Z. That's it. And as I've already posted on the website, I said I wouldn't, but I have already. Here's your homework assignment. There are 5 problems that I want you to go ahead and solve that are similar to the ones we've just done.